Richard the Lionheart, the Warrior King of England. Introduction. Richard I of England, famously known as Richard the Lionheart, is one of the most legendary kings in English history. A warrior before a ruler, Richard spent most of his reign leading armies rather than governing his kingdom. His name became synonymous with courage, chivalry, and military brilliance. But was he truly a great king or just a great warrior? Let's dive into the thrilling life of the Lionheart. Early life: a prince born for war. Born on September 8, 1157 in Oxford, England, Richard was the third son of King Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in medieval Europe. Unlike most English kings, Richard barely spent any time in England. He was raised in the Duchy of Aquitaine, modern-day France, where he inherited his mother's fiery ambition and love for poetry and warfare. Even as a young prince, Richard was known for his exceptional military skill. By the age of 16, he was already leading armies, crushing rebellions, and proving himself a natural-born warrior. His physical strength, golden red hair, and fearless nature made him a larger-than-life figure, earning him the title Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart, a king more interested in war than ruling. In 1189, after years of conflict with his father, Richard finally took the throne following Henry II's death. However, unlike most kings who focused on governing their lands, Richard had only one true passion: war and conquest. His reign began with preparation for the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, a military campaign to reclaim Jerusalem from Saladin, the great Muslim leader. To finance this ambitious endeavor, Richard heavily taxed England, sold royal positions, and even remarked, "I would have sold London if I could find a buyer." The Third Crusade, the Lionheart versus Saladin, Richard's journey to the Holy Land was nothing short of epic. He assembled a massive fleet and led one of the greatest military campaigns of the Middle Ages. Richard's victories in the Holy Land: the Siege of Acre, 1191. After a brutal siege, Richard and his forces captured the heavily fortified city of Acre, a major stronghold in the Holy Land. The massacre at Acre: after negotiations with Saladin failed, Richard executed 2,700 Muslim prisoners, an act that struck fear into his enemies. The Battle of Arsuf, 1191. Richard's tactical genius was on full display as he crushed Saladin's army in open battle, proving himself as one of the finest commanders of his time. The failed dream of reclaiming Jerusalem. Despite his victories, Richard never managed to capture Jerusalem, the ultimate goal of the crusade. His forces were exhausted, supplies were running low, and political issues in Europe forced him to return home. In 1192, he signed a peace treaty with Saladin, securing Christian access to Jerusalem but leaving the city in Muslim hands. Captured and ransomed, the king becomes a prisoner. On his way back to England, Richard was shipwrecked and forced to travel through enemy territory. In 1192, he was captured by Duke Leopold of Austria and handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. The price for his freedom? An astronomical ransom of 150,000 marks, equivalent to billions today, which nearly bankrupted England. Despite his imprisonment, Richard's legend only grew. Songs and stories painted him as a noble, fearless king, unfairly imprisoned by his enemies. England eventually paid the ransom, and Richard was released in 1194, returning home for the first time in years. The final battle and death of a warrior king. Richard spent less than 6 months in England before heading back to France to defend his territories. In 1199, while besieging a small castle in Limousin, Richard was shot by a crossbow bolt. Though the wound wasn't fatal at first, it became infected, and on April 6, 1199, Richard the Lionheart died. His last act? He pardoned the crossbowmen who shot him, showing an unusual moment of mercy for a warrior king. Legacy: was Richard the Lionheart a great king? Richard I remains one of the most famous monarchs in English history, but his reign was far from traditional. What made him great? An incredible military leader, respected even by his enemies. His bravery and battlefield tactics were legendary. His rivalry with Saladin is one of the most iconic in history. What made him a poor king? He spent less than a year of his 10-year reign in England. He exhausted England's wealth for wars and ransoms. His focus on war led to instability in his own kingdom. Despite his shortcomings as a ruler, Richard the Lionheart's name endures as a symbol of heroism, adventure, and medieval chivalry. His story, filled with battles, betrayals, and legendary deeds, remains one of the most thrilling tales of the Middle Ages. Conclusion: Richard I wasn't a perfect king, far from it, but he was a warrior like no other, and his fearless pursuit of glory ensured that his name would never be forgotten. Whether you see him as a reckless adventurer or a heroic knight, there's no denying that Richard the Lionheart lived and died as a warrior.